Hi, I'm Ryan Davis.
And I'm Kieran Schmidt.
And this is Out of Office, a travel podcast.
This seat taken.
Hey, Kieran.
Ryan, you sound relaxed.
Well, I'm in beautiful Bogota right now in my hotel, staring at your pretty face on this laptop.
He's lying, everybody. We are not on video right now. Ryan is lying to you. I
have a picture. I travel with a framed photo of you, actually.
Oh, I'm sorry. I misunderstood. That's right. Your Christmas gift a couple of years ago. The framed photo of my face. No, so you're out. You're down in Bogota now. It's very funny because you're in Bogota, but is this episode about Bogota?
No, this episode's about Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh and Bogota. You know, they're not very similar. I mean, there's some, there's mountains, I guess, but they're different.
It's often, Bogota famously called the Pittsburgh of Colombia.
I guess that's better than being Pittsburgh being the Bogota of Pennsylvania. But
you're still taking advantage of the post-COVID travel world. You went to Mexico City and now you're in Bogota. And are you coming back to the U.S. from there?
No, I'm sort of kind of exploring, I'm out of office. I'm not, I wish I was out of office.
Oh, brother. That's like when they say the name of the movie in the movie. Nobody likes that line.
No, it's true. I'm sorry, folks.
These are some Star Wars.
They say that?
No, they don't. They don't say that, Ryan. So where are you going after Bogota?
Paraguay.
Oh my gosh. This is really something.
I know there's going to be the Bogota episode finally will be happening. And it's going to be, I think I'm going to have a couple other episodes out of this trip. So, you got to catch up, Kieran. You got to leave Boston one day. And
are you going to do a special Paraguay and Paraguay series for us?
For my research, it doesn't look like that kind of place. It's not Zona Rosa in Mexico City,
And by research, you mean you were looking at Grindr through a VPN that put you in Paraguay. It didn't see many matches.
Yeah, it's just called the Grindr Explore feature.
Now, is Grindr active in Colombia?
Gosh, I haven't even checked, Mom. Kieran.
Oh, what a lie. That is a giant mentira, as they would say in Colombia.
There's a musical in Mexico City I just saw called Mentiras, and it's sort of the Mamma Mia of Mexico City, and it's so much fun. And we know our audience loves musicals, so they should check that out.
It's amazing to me that you often go to theater and movies in Spanish-speaking countries, even though you're not a master of the language.
Well, I would go see a movie. Well, I did see Jurassic Park 6 or whatever it was in Spanish, but that was pretty easy to follow. But, musicals are not always that complicated. Like, I wouldn't want to go see Hamlet in Spanish, probably, but people singing and dancing and running around, you can figure out what's going on.
Yeah, no, I think a musical is probably a good experience, even in a language you don't necessarily speak.
And if you know the musical, it's even more fun because it's like,
sure,
clever, yeah.
Now, so Ryan, so again, rather than talking about some far-flung adventure, you're keeping it local. You recently went to Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I went to Pittsburgh. It was the third time that I've been there, but both of the other times I've only been overnight. And here I was there for a few days for a conference, Netroots Nation. Shout out to the Netroots Nation. And I stayed an extra couple of days so I could have some time to actually explore the city. And, it is a serious city to explore. So I'm looking forward to sort of unpacking it. Then I'm going to bring on Pittsburgh food writer, Hal B. Klein, and he's the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette senior food writer and dining critic. And we're going to talk a bit about the food scene because unfortunately, I was in conference land and then museum land and walking around. I didn't really have time to eat a lot of places, but he has a lot to tell us about the Pittsburgh dining scene.
Wow, you love mixing up. You're bringing in this new format of city guides plus city expert interview dropped into the city guide.
It's
exciting. You're constantly innovating.
The podcast is taking off, folks. We gotta innovate. We gotta push forward. And I want to give a shout out to Kinsey's 81, who says the show's easy to listen to, informative, and makes them smile. Thank you,
again,
Kinsey.
getting that Eastern Shore of Maryland episode seems to have really grabbed hearts and minds.
I think it's just because the Eastern Shore of Maryland doesn't have a lot of internet content. So when people, it's like they're looking it up on Apple, and they find us.
Do you think we happen to release on Internet Day when the Eastern Shore finally gets internet and everybody goes on?
That's when the man brings the internet in on the horse and wagon. Yeah, and it works for a few days, and then he moves on to the next town. Yeah.
So yes, please keep sending the reviews, and also if you're a shy person, you're not an extrovert, you don't want to put your review out there on the public forums, feel free to shoot us an email.
Yeah, outofofficepod@gmail.com or Instagram at @podcast.
Well, it's Ooh Podcast. It's O Podcast.
O Podcast. Like podcast
or Ooh Podcast. But it's important to note that the email and the Instagram handle different. That's how you know you're good at marketing, folks, when you've got different hooks for both.
Exactly. We like to keep people searching.
Well, Ryan, with that, I gotta say, despite all this Bogota talk, I gotta get to Pittsburgh.
Yeah. No, I think it's time to take off.
Tell the cabin crew.
Flight attendants, prepare for takeoff, please.
All right, Ryan. I do hope that we're going to touch on Mr. Rogers today. But that's the thing that I know most about Pittsburgh.
Don't give it away. Don't give away the excitement, okay?
Don't people know that?
Put your sweater back on. Put those shoes back on. Walk out that door.
Back out the door. All right.
So Pittsburgh is actually a pretty big city. It's got 300,000 folks who live in the actual Pittsburgh proper, and then 2 million folks in the metro. Where I stayed downtown, it was pretty dense and walkable. We're going to talk a bit with Hal about the various neighborhoods and the food scene. But most of the things I'm going to talk about today are sort of in sort of the downtown Pittsburgh area and it's either walkable or a short ride away. Now, do you know that Pittsburgh actually sits at the head of the Ohio River? The Ohio River begins in Pittsburgh.
All right, Ryan, I know this one's going to be hard for you to pronounce, so I'm just going to jump in and I'm going to say the name of these two rivers for you. Ready? The Monongahela River and the Allegheny River come together in a marriage right there in Pittsburgh
to form the Ohio River.
I knew you could handle that one. See how I paused? This is why it's a partnership, this podcast.
And because there's so many rivers, Pittsburgh's known as a city of bridges, and there are 446 bridges. I have to say, I only walked over like 6 bridges, but I can understand how there'd be that many. I mean, it is a very, those cities where you just sort of like look at the skyline and you just see all these bridges. It is one of those cities, and one is named after one of their favorite sons, Andy Warhol. We'll talk about him in a little bit. But there's a lot of walkable public spaces and parks around the rivers. Lots of people biking. It's very vibrant sort of around that area. People out having a good time and enjoying the weather. So that's really a cool part about the city. It's also
so it doesn't feel like chopped up because of the rivers, because there are so many bridges.
Yeah, no, I mean, I took a long walk where I crossed a bridge and then I walked all the way down a point and then I crossed another bridge and up another bridge and to the funicular, which I did not ride because,
you're the worst. It's almost like you're doing it just to bait me now.
I tried to ride it. I went to ride it and you needed like exact change. And I was like, I'd walked for so long.
Exact change?
Yeah, because it's like run by the MTA of Pittsburgh. It's not the MTA, but whoever it is, it's like basically public transit there. And it goes up the little side of this hill and you can see over the whole city. But I could not do it. I walked all the way there. I was very disappointed. I knew you'd be disappointed with me.
Yeah, because I have long dreamed of a funicular episode.
I think we're gonna get there. Bogota has a funicular, so we'll see. We'll see if you luck out this time.
Are you planning on riding it?
I've already ridden it.
Excellent.
Yeah, let's not unpack that yet.
I want to do a funiculars of the world.
I think we should.
Yeah, a tour of funiculars.
Yeah, come ride on their funicular.
That could be a great title. It's still working on it.
So Pittsburgh is a very rich cultural and food city. They have 25 museums, and this is a combination of Carnegie and Heinz money. When you combine those, you get don't know, a very ketchupy train or something. But it's a combination of those two families that have really built out this museum infrastructure, which is super impressive. And it's also a super historic city because it was the kickoff of the Lewis and Clark expedition and the first battle of the French and Indian War. And, you know, when I was there, I was realizing as I was seeing these plaques and reading about the French and Indian War, I don't know much about the French and Indian War. Do you?
Yeah, I know a fair amount of the French and Indian War for sure.
Yeah?
I mean, this is where George Washington cut his teeth.
Oh, yeah. And we're going to talk a little bit about that.
That's probably why his teeth were so bad, actually, famously.
Yeah, that's what led to the wooden teeth, because he cut them there in Pittsburgh. But so, yeah, it's definitely a story that feels, it's definitely a city that feels very historic. You know, it's got the remnants of its sort of great industrial past sort of everywhere. Yeah. And, you know, one of the places you can explore that great industrial past is the Heinz History Center.
I'm very struck before you step deeply into some spotlights on museums. You know, the whole time you were there, you seemed to be in museum after museum. I mean, it really, I've never thought of Pittsburgh as like a standout must go for museums, but you really have convinced me.
Yeah, no, my argument here is that Pittsburgh is a fantastic long weekend town. There's so much to do, so much to see, places to eat. Like it's a really good time. So you step into the Heinz History Center. This is sort of a regional history museum about Pittsburgh in the region. It's a Smithsonian affiliate, so you know it's classy. And it has quite a few exhibits.
Or at least classy adjacent.
Yeah, it's classy adjacent.
It's like classy, but ketchup got on their tie.
So, you know, it's classy for a museum that has an exhibition on ketchup. Okay. So keeping that in mind, let's jump into what you asked about earlier. Yes, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was shot in Pittsburgh at the WQED studios. And the Heinz History Center actually houses the set of Mr. Rogers.
And does that extend to the fantasy world inside the tree with the trolley?
You've got the entry in the living room set, right? So you can see where he walked in, took his shoes off, did all that good stuff that we all grew up with. You've got King Friday's castle. You've got little King Friday himself sitting there in the castle, just hanging out for eternity. You've got the great oak tree, which is, of course, where the owl lived. And then you've got this absolutely horrifying, lifelike, they call it a lifelike figure of Mr. Rogers. It looks like the kind of like it would come to life in a children's horror movie and take you out or something. But it is there. I would avoid that. I would don't look it in the eyes. Don't make it angry.
Is it like a wax figure?
It looks like it could be a wax figure.
Boy.
Yeah, it's just a little sketch. You know,
do they have a gift shop?
They do have a little gift shop. I didn't see if there was Mr. Rogers stuff there, but what it was really cool to see everything, and everything is smaller than you imagine it to be. You know, like the tree is not that. The tree is the biggest thing. Like the tree is actually pretty big. The house is like that little house area, really small. It's like wow, they really made that work on TV. It's the magic of TV. Kieran. But what was really funny was all like the 40s, 50s, and 60-year-olds kind of like fanboying out to the Mr. Rod, getting their kids to take pictures of them. And the kids are like, what is this? Like, what is this silly tree? And all the adults, like the millennials, old millennials and the Gen Xers and the boomers were just like, kind of like smiling and reliving their childhood.
I feel like I'd be in tears, but I can say for my children, Charlie's not going to sit through a Mr. Rogers. The slowest is like Sesame Street, and the new Sesame Street episodes are like bang, 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 elbow, birdie, blah, blah, blah. It's frenetic.
Yeah. So I was disappointed to see the kids kind of not even have any recognition at all, like of Mr. Rogers. Well, I'm kind of looking around smiling like that's kind of a weirdo. But it is very cool.
I mean, it's a show that devoted like 8 minutes an episode to the guy taking his shoes off.
Yeah, and boy, do they have some pairs of those shoes. They've got some sweaters. You know, I mean, this is an exhibit, folks.
This is why I asked about the gift shop. I feel like the merchandising opportunities are aplenty.
Oh, yeah. And, the Heinz know how to merchandise for sure. So there must be something there in the gift shop that's Mr. Rogers related. I'll have to, reason to go back as we say. Another thing I really enjoyed about the Heinz History Museum, they have an exhibit now up of this artist named John Kane. And John Kane's an interesting character because he moved to Pittsburgh in a big wave of immigration. He was a steel worker and a real sort of American workman, which is the name of the exhibit, The Life and Art of an American Workman. But at the same time,
a working title we had for the podcast, the American Workman.
But at the same time, he was an artist, and during his breaks at lunch and on his way home, and all these different times, he would be sketching and painting. Well, not painting on his breaks, but sketching and doing all sorts of things like that. And the exhibit features 37 original works of art, and he actually became quite well known and famous later on in his life, and was able to make a living from his art, which is really exciting. It was really sort of interesting to think of a guy. He loses his leg at some point in a railroad incident, and he's sort of a really like hard knuckle, taking care of his family out there in the steel mill, and at the same time he's sort of sensitive and has paints a kind of like all over the map, from like stills of Pittsburgh work life to some family portraits. He does a sort of kind of like hip thing where he paints the American flag and the Gettysburg Address on it, because he was a big fan of Lincoln. So he was, he struggled with drinking, which, I can't identify with, but it's, he's definitely a cool character, and I'll make sure to post a couple of his works on the Instagram. But this is actually open until January 8th. So folks have time to go check that out if they're going to make it to Pittsburgh this fall.
So did he eventually give up like his arduous laboring job in order to full-time paint?
Yeah, he eventually, was well known enough and respected enough, and sort of became part of the, the Pittsburgh art scene, and was able to make a living, doing art, which is pretty interesting. And he never had any kind of formal artist training, and he would talk to some of the more, the more academic artists in the city. And he would ask about, should he take lessons? And they said, no, you've got your style, you've got your thing, you should just do it. So really an interesting guy.
Really cool.
And then they've got a exhibition on the British, French, and Indian War, which you claim to know a lot about. I know some about.
I don't think I said I knew a lot. I was familiar. I'm familiar with the general outlines of the war.
Right. One of the first world wars, if not the first world war, happening in North America, involving multiple European powers.
Sure, but when we talk about the First World War, we're not talking about this one.
Well, they sort of make an argument that like we should be talking about this one as the First World War. That it is.
It's a prequel. It's a prequel.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, George Washington, he fights in this war. I think he loses several battles, which he gets only better at losing as he climbs up the ranks. But he was a big fan of.
He looked so good doing.
He did, and there's some less creepy, lifelike big models of George Washington sitting there, like looking wistfully around and writing in his journal and all these things. But in 1753, he wrote in his journal that he spent time viewing the rivers and the land of the fork, which he thought was extremely well situated for a fort. Because two rivers, you could command both the rivers. And he was talking about the Pittsburgh Point, where these two rivers that we talked about, they connect. And now that's been turned into a park. And it's called the Point State Park. And right there is and you can't miss it, because there's a massive fountain that sprays water up 150 feet that you can't miss. And that's actually where Washington was talking about when he wrote this. So it was cool to have walked around the town the whole day before. And then when I'm in the museum, I'm like, oh, wow, I remember that area. And now it kind of was it was more meaningful to me now that I understood that this was an area where during the French and Indian War, Washington was sort of stationed.
Can I ask, in the French and Indian War, despite that being its name, it's really between the British and the French. I mean, the British colonies and the French.
Yeah, and the Native Americans are most definitely involved as well.
They were, but different tribes were loyal to different. Some were loyal to Britain, some were which were American, and some were loyal to the French.
Yeah, I mean, as I've learned, reading about Pizarro and Cortez, I mean, this was sort of the strategy was how do you divide the locals amongst themselves and get them to join your campaign. And what they don't know is no matter who wins, it's bad for them, right?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Fair enough.
But
this is one of those weird times, though, where it just seems like George Washington is everywhere. He's one of the 10 people that are everywhere.
Yeah, but if he hadn't have done the next thing, it's not like we would be reading about him in the French and Indian War, right? It's sort of like he went on to become incredibly famous, and then everybody's like, what did he do before that? Oh, he lost some battles in the French and Indian War. Oh, great.
I mean, from what I understand, his primary qualification was that he was very tall.
Yes.
Very tall at a time when many people were short.
Oh, he shows up, this story, obviously, he shows up at with the signing of the Declaration, and he's dressed in his French and Indian War uniform. And everyone's like, well, who should lead the army? And he's looking around I don't know. Oh, I love it. And then, of course, Kieran, because it is the Heinz History Center, there is quite a bit about the Heinz family and the how the Heinz family, were really good canners, and they really knew how to take tomatoes and do all sorts of stuff with them, famously. And you can learn a lot about ketchup and canning. I have to confess, I moved a little faster through this part of the museum than I did, the French and Indian War section and Mr. Robinson.
That's very un-American of you. This is a great American company.
It is, and no doubt. And there's even art made from Heinz bottles. There's a massive, huge Heinz bottle made of smaller Heinz bottles. So with that kind of innovation in art, you can't go wrong.
I have a couple Heinz specific questions. The
Okay.
first is, do they talk at all about when Heinz tried to make ketchup that was not red? Remember, there was maybe a green ketchup. It was a massive failure. It was just horrid.
No, what was that? More contemporary?
More contemporary than what?
No, then this museum focuses on a lot on the founding of Heinz, and you can, I mean, it does have that sort of marketing thing where you can see how the labels evolved over the years. They love to do that, in the Coke Museum and everything.
I'm just confirming. I've just Googled to be sure I didn't make up. Indeed, they did make a green ketchup. It seems that they manufactured it for 6 years, and it was under a line called the Easy Squirt ketchup.
I'm sorry?
The Easy Squirt.
The Easy Squirt ketchup.
Yeah. I think that's one of the filters on Grindr, if I'm not mistaken. So that was my first. The second question is there mention of John Kerry?
There is a little mention of John Kerry, obviously, because he's a Heinz, and he was a presidential nominee. So he's a pretty impressive guy, right?
This gives you the direct tie into Boston. This Heinz money is what purchased his lovely Beacon Hill home that you can go visit when you're in Boston. I might have to do a 4th, 5th episode on this.
I would absolutely love to tour the John and Teresa home. That would be exciting.
It would be fun to try to start the tradition of people leaving empty small Heinz bottles on the staircase leading up to his house.
Oh, I'm sure that would be beautiful. Just hopefully they clean them out first, so the ant situation would get pretty outrageous.
Interesting.
So who else besides the Heinz? You have the Carnegies.
Which always a big debate. Is it Carnegie? Is it Carnegie?
I think it's Carnegie. I mean, you say, who says Carnegie? Who says Carnegie Hall? I've never heard anyone say that.
They don't say that in New York, but the family famously says Carnegie.
They're just trying to be fancy, It's like
Carnegie.
Yeah, no, I think it's Carnegie or Carnegie, however you want to say it. Potato. They spent
all this talk of potatoes and potatoes. I can get back that Heinz exhibit.
Oh, you're gonna get hungry after the interview too. So in 1895, Andrew Carnegie says, I want to bring the world to the people of Pittsburgh. And he does that by founding a series of museums, which is now 4 museums. Not going to talk about all of them because I didn't get a chance to, but the museums in his collection are the Carnegie Museum of Art, the Carnegie Museum of Natural History, the Carnegie Science Center, and the very cool Andy Warhol Museum. Are you a Andy Warhol fan?
You know, I am familiar with his work. He's probably a little too cool for me. I'm just a tired old dad.
There was a great Warhol museum at the Brooklyn Museum that we talked about on the pod. It was really interesting. I learned a lot about him and his attachment to Catholicism, which, certainly identify with that. But it was in this museum that I learned more about his career as a marketing dude in New York City.
Oh God! You had me with Catholicism, then you brought up marketing. I'm lost again.
Well,
yeah.
you've got both of them. But he was a marketing guy in New York. He did marketing illustrations for advertisements, and this guy was so successful. He was making $70K a year in 1950, which is that's like Don Draper money. So yeah, he was quite, he gets to sort of, the thing that's interesting about Warhol is he gets to sort of make all this money in marketing, and then he gets to sort of turn it all on his head and make fun of, in some weird way, satirize marketing, but not really. So Andy Warhol is one of those guys who really gets to have the cake and eat it too.
I feel like he took kind of like of course, famously with the Campbell soup can, he took these things that would be out there as marketing and elevated them into pop art.
Yeah, exactly. The Campbell soup can, here it is. And he does every single flavor and sells each one as a different piece. I mean, he's really clever. If not, he's other things, but he's definitely really clever. But this museum opened in 1994, which is exciting. And of course,
why is that exciting?
It's the newest of the museums. It holds the largest collection of Warhol art and archive in the world, from the 40s all the way to his death in 1987. And there's just a lot of stuff to see. We've talked a little bit. You can see obviously some of the famous Campbell soup stuff, some of his early marketing work. Some of the other kind of strange, interesting factory, stuff he did at the factory where he was taking a lot of photos and portraits of people and celebrities. A lot of that in this collection is very cool. I have to say my favorite piece was not in the museum, is not actually by Andy Warhol, but by Keith Haring. Keith Haring?
Of course.
By Keith Haring, he had a very
cartoony, colorful kind of faceless figures.
Exactly. There's a very cool elephant that he painted. That's sort of the centerpiece of one of the galleries in the space, and it was probably my favorite piece in the whole museum. But it's quite a big place, and it's on the other side of downtown.
And the elephant is like a sculpture, right? Not a painting.
Yeah, it's a sculpture. Yeah. And if you're staying downtown, when you actually go to the museum, if you decide to walk, you actually walk to the museum by crossing the Andy Warhol Bridge. So there's a lot of Andy Warhol in Pittsburgh. He's obviously one of the most successful artists to come out of Pittsburgh, along with their friend that we talked about earlier, of course, Mr. John Kane. So can't forget him.
Is the Andy Warhol Bridge colorful in any way? Does it reflect the Andy Warhol name?
So when I saw it on the map and I was like, okay, I'm going to walk across the bridge, I imagined there'd be something that is like a little Andy Warhol-y, but not really.
Blonde hair on it or something.
Yeah, that would be cool, right? I mean, there's still time, Pittsburgh, to do something like that. No, but there's there's like a plaque and stuff, but it doesn't feel like when you're walking across it, it's not like, is this an Andy Warhol bridge? No, you don't think that, unfortunately.
Well, you figure by the time they got to the, 446th bridge, they're like, just put a name on it. We're tired of making these distinctive.
Yeah, no, exactly. And so that's one of the, so that's the Andy Warhol Museum, which again is part of the Carnegie museums. Another one of the Carnegie museums I got to go to was the Carnegie Museum of Art. Now, what's cool about this is the Carnegie Museum of Art actually shares like a massive complex with the Carnegie Museum of Natural History. So it's like having a mini Museum of Natural History and Met kind of combined into one museum. Like you don't even have to go across the park, right? It's like they're right there together.
Yeah, that's a good sell.
Yeah, it's a pretty good sell. I didn't have time to go to the Natural History Museum. Also, like, I've been to a lot of natural history museums. They're great, but the one in New York has such a special place in my heart that I didn't want to do that. But the Carnegie Museum of Art has,
I got engaged there.
Right underneath the whale.
Nope, that's not true. No, we got engaged in the
on top of the Teddy statue that they moved out.
No, the Hall of North American Mammals, because Catherine and I are North American mammals. So there was the Alaskan brown bear, and we were between a bison and a moose. Ideal.
That is so romantic.
It was romantic, and I got down on one knee, and I was ready to say my speech, and Catherine said, "Yes, stop, yes."
Were there people around, or was this like you got in early?
Yeah, it was pretty early morning. Okay. So, there were a few.
She had to suspect something. You're like, hey, let's go to the Museum of Natural History, 8 a.m.
I really want to get the breakfast brunch.
Exactly. But the Carnegie Museum, really huge collection. There's an incredible grand staircase in the center from 1907 that was I really loved. You've got some water lilies from Monet, of course. There was a really interesting piece that you would have liked, and I'll post a picture of it on the Instagram, by a really early Black artist who literally was alive during the Civil War, who painted a picture of Abe Lincoln in his attic reading a book, and it's called Abe Lincoln's First Book, and it's a lovely little painting, and I hadn't heard of Horace Pippin before, so it was good to see that. And then, of course, like any good museum, they've got some miniatures on display, which is always nice.
Really burying the lead. No wonder you didn't make it to the Natural History Museum. Just drooling over the miniatures.
It was between that and the Van Gogh. I was like, no, but really, really impressive collection of art and artifacts. Well worth seeing. It took me about 2 hours to see the collection, and I had a great time.
I feel like you're glancing by the miniatures here. What's there in miniature?
I mean, it is very much like old rooms, kind of like the museum in Chicago. It's like it's not that many. It's like 8 or 9 kind of small rooms that have been recreated in miniature. So it's cool, but I've seen a lot of miniatures.
Yeah, you're coming off as a real miniature snob here. I'm sure you were excited to find them, but you've been exposed to so many miniatures at this point.
It's true. But it's always nice just to have a little taste of the miniature in any museum. So
a little taste. I got
it. I know, it's good, right? So those are the museums that I had time to see in the city. But like I mentioned earlier, there are something like 25 museums, including one dedicated entirely to bicycles. So, and if you're into sports, and I have literally no interest in Pittsburgh sports, but if Pittsburgh sports is something you've ever been interested in, seems to be a lot of museums around that will give you that. So very cool city.
This is the wrong podcast for you, my friends. This is the wrong podcast for you, my sports loving friends.
No, I think one day we'll have to have somebody on to do something about sports, just for the SEO, if anything. So Kieran, I think now that we've talked about all the museums and walking around and seeing the sights, you're probably hungry, right?
Starving. All that talk about ketchup and Campbell's soup.
Coming up right next is Pittsburgh Post-Gazette senior food writer and dining critic Hal B. Klein. And Hal's going to talk to us about the cool neighborhoods to eat in Pittsburgh and some of the best restaurants. And it's a very diverse and interesting food scene. So I think folks are going to enjoy it. So get out your notes and, you're going to need to make some reservations. You got to make some reservations after this.
Oh, is it right next, Ryan?
It's coming up next. Here it comes. Well, welcome, Hal, to Out of Office. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, and excited to talk about Pittsburgh and Pittsburgh food.
Yeah, so tell us a bit about how you got into food journalism. What drew you to writing about restaurants and food?
I mean, I came to it through a little bit of a circuitous route. So I was actually working for the first part of my life, I guess, as an actor doing stuff on stage and film in New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and decided in around 2008 that was, over. I think that was when the economy really started going haywire during that recession, and had always been interested in food and was living in Los Angeles at the time and was, in this place with amazing farmers markets and stuff, and decided I wanted to do something a little bit with it. Found out about this kind of esoteric master's degree called food studies, which takes a lot of different aspects of food in the food world. Thought I was going to do it in a way to like kind of help people shop, go to farmers markets, learn how to cook better. Ended up in Pittsburgh at this university called Chatham. It was the third food studies program in the nation at the time. Thought I would be in Pittsburgh for 2 years, and I just celebrated 12 years in Pittsburgh 2 weeks ago. So I just, while I was there, got a job writing for the Alt Weekly about booze and drinking in Pittsburgh, and doing a story on our NPR affiliate about food and the environment for radio. And then Pittsburgh, one of the wonderful things about Pittsburgh is that it's a very, very interconnected town. And once you start meeting people, you start meeting a lot of other people. And so I just started meeting people that were involved in different aspects of food journalism, and got a job freelancing for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, the newspaper. That led to a party. I was at a party, met the then new editor at Pittsburgh Magazine. We started talking. She's like, you should write for me. So I ended up as the dining critic eventually of that magazine, was there for 7 years, and then just moved back to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette in June full-time as their dining critic and senior food writer. So kind of a really interesting, strange approach to like getting into food journalism that was a little bit non-traditional, I'd say.
I wonder if you and I ever bumped into each other in your theater days in the alts in New York, because that was also my scene.
It's entirely possible.
We'll have to figure that out.
Definitely.
Well, that's really interesting. So you've been writing about Pittsburgh, specifically the food scene, for a while now. What do people think of when they think about the Pittsburgh food scene? What's it all about?
It's interesting because I think from an outside perspective, there's still this stereotype that it's a lot of very heavy food, a lot of, food that was kind of just like all sort of like Eastern European heavy stuffed cabbage, pierogies, halushki. And that's definitely part of Pittsburgh food. And it's definitely a really important and great part of Pittsburgh food. But I think what's happening now is, again, it's very similar in a lot of ways to what's happening in other things in Pittsburgh. There's just so much interconnectedness. So there's like a lot of creativity now. There's a lot more connection to farms and farm systems. And you're starting to see a lot of restaurants really express what does Western Pennsylvania food mean today, which I think is a little bit different than what the stereotype may be. And then on top of that, Pittsburgh was a city that had a ton of immigration in the early 20th century, and through kind of like the 1940s, 50s, but did not have a lot of immigration in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s because of what happened with the economy and the industries that were here that collapsed. And now you're starting to see a lot of really rich and vibrant culture from people that are moving here from elsewhere. And that's really that's the new thing that's really happening. That's really starting to impact what's happening with food and restaurants in Pittsburgh now.
Yeah, and it seems like Pittsburgh has, a pretty vibrant, obviously it's a college town. It's got a technology scene. What are sort of the neighborhoods that people go to eat? Because I stayed downtown, and one of my friends in Pittsburgh messaged and said, well, you're in the worst neighborhood in Pittsburgh. And I was in the financial district in New York City last night, and, I understand about how these districts work, but what neighborhoods do people, the foodies in Pittsburgh go out to?
Yeah, I mean, downtown is tricky right now in a lot of places, right? Because of what happened during the coronavirus pandemic and people leaving office. So, and you're starting to see in Pittsburgh little kind of hints that downtown is coming back. You're actually very close to the Strip District, which is historically a really interesting neighborhood to dine in. And there's a lot of markets there. And there are a couple of great restaurants that have been there for the last few years as well. But for me, I think the most interesting neighborhood in Pittsburgh to dine in is Squirrel Hill, which used to be a historically Jewish neighborhood and still has a lot of that. And there's really amazing cooking in people's homes, but not a lot in the restaurant field. But there are a ton, and I think this is the thing that's probably the most surprising about Pittsburgh. There are all these regional Chinese restaurants there that are really incredible. I travel to New York a lot. I grew up in the Bay Area. My family's still there, so I'm there a lot. There are restaurants here that I think are just as good as a lot of the regional Chinese restaurants there. And that's really incredible, and it's really impressive, and it's something that just keeps getting better and better too. Lawrenceville is another great neighborhood.
Oh, sorry. Are there any of those restaurants you'd recommend? Of those Chinese restaurants?
Yeah, there are a few of them that are really incredible. So there's a restaurant called Amazing Dumplings. It used to be called Sakura, but the owners are from northern China, and they, for years sort of had this kind of catch-all Chinese-Japanese restaurant, but then we're really encouraged to start serving the food of Xi'an province in northern China, and have gotten more and more into it. So a couple months ago, just decided to totally rebrand. They're doing all their dumplings from scratch. They're doing all their handmade noodles from scratch. And it's really amazing. And it's really incredible because I think a lot of people don't really get that taste of northern Chinese food. There's a restaurant called Chengdu Gourmet, which actually is just moving to the other side of Pittsburgh, to the North Hills, but they're keeping their original location open. That's a Sichuan restaurant. The chef there is, I think he's been a James Beard Best Chef Mid-Atlantic semifinalist for the last 5 years running. So that's pretty amazing. There's a place called Everyday Noodles that, again, does soup dumplings. Cafe 33 is really good, like roots home-style Taiwanese food. So it's a pretty amazing neighborhood in that way.
Is this a new dim sum restaurant that you wrote about? Is that in the same neighborhood?
So Parlor Dim Sum, which is a restaurant I just wrote about, is in Lawrenceville, which is probably the other neighborhood that I would recommend for dining if you're visiting Pittsburgh, especially if you're staying downtown, because Pittsburgh is full of giant hills, which makes it amazing because we have all these distinct neighborhoods, but it also makes it kind of hard to get somewhere if you're visiting sometimes. But Lawrenceville is a place that if you wanted to, you could walk straight from downtown. It's flat. You'd walk through the Strip District. You'd walk all the way there. Lawrenceville is a neighborhood that has this real exciting mix of restaurants. So you have everything from Morcia, which was started by Justin Severino, who's one of the more important chefs in Pittsburgh's culinary history over the last 10, 15 years. Poulet Bleu, which is from the Richard Deschamps Restaurant Group, which is a great French restaurant. You've got Driftwood Oven there, which is a restaurant that is really based on sourdough starters. So it has these incredible pizzas, but also these great sandwiches, meatballs, salads. They have a bakery there. And then Parlor Dim Sum is the newest addition to the scene. It's by Roger Lee, who also has a little place called Umami, which is a little izakaya on the third floor above another restaurant and bar called Round Corner Cantina, which is great. And he's been in Pittsburgh since I think 2008 or so in various restaurants, and then decided to really dig into his own roots. His family, he's from Philadelphia, but his family is from Hong Kong. And he missed dim sum. He's like, there's just not a lot of great dim sum in Pittsburgh right now. So he decided to take a place where he used to have a restaurant that closed during the pandemic, and then the building had a lot of trouble. So he had to do a lot of renovations anyway, and turn it into this new restaurant that's a real celebration of Cantonese and Hong Kong food.
That sounds great. I'm a huge dim sum fan. So had I known about that, I probably would have made the effort to get there. But as we say on the podcast, reason to go back. I noticed that you didn't mention, or you haven't mentioned yet, Brandi Brothers, which I've been told is like an institution. And I went and I had the sandwich, with the fries, and it was like a Reuben with fries, I guess. Why has that become such a staple? Is it something that's just sort of for tourists? What's your take on that?
So Brandi Brothers is this institution, and I think it's really important for every city to recognize and celebrate places that have been around for a long time, right? Like that's a really important part of our history. And that's another, the original location is located in the Strip District, which I talked about a little bit earlier. That was where all the produce terminals were. So you'd have all these trucks come in. So the way the sandwich was invented was basically like, let's put everything you'd need for a meal in between two slices of bread. And, I think it's still a good sandwich, and it's nice, especially late at night. It's a great thing. But I think, sometimes as things change over the years and over the decades, they become a little bit different version of what they used to be. So it doesn't quite have that same feeling of a sandwich. To me, it feels a little bit corporate at this point. But also, so what I would say is, if you live in Pittsburgh, or if you're out late at night and you're looking for something to eat, it's worth going there. And especially the downtown location, because it does have this, building that's steeped in history, and you can kind of feel the years of people having, early morning or late night bites there.
Is that the one that I went to? Is that the one by the square, the downtown location?
You went to one in Market Square, which is a newer one. So basically what happened is, they started opening more locations, which, you can't fault someone for wanting to do that and build on a brand name and stuff.
They have one at the airport.
Once you start, right. Yeah. They have one at the airport. There's one, there are a couple in the suburbs. And so I think once you start doing that, you kind of often end up watering down what made the original so special. So if you are in town and you are visiting, and especially if you're out late at night, I would say that might be a thing that you might want to do just to check out. Or as, I wouldn't make it like the centerpiece of your trip necessarily, because I think what's happening now is there are just so many other places in Pittsburgh to visit, right?
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. So, I do have to say though, on the way out of Pittsburgh, I had another one of the sandwiches. I probably didn't need a second, but it was like $9.
Time for a second sandwich.
Yeah, exactly. It was like $9, and as somebody who eats unfortunately at LaGuardia and JFK quite a bit, the idea you can get a $9 Reuben. I mean, I was sort of like taken aback. I thought it was going to be like $20 sandwich. So kudos to them for keeping the prices sane at the airport. Well, look, if you have friends coming to town for a few days, where are the places that you definitely want to take them to show them, the best of the dining scene?
So there are a few places that I would recommend if you're visiting for a few days. So, going to visit Squirrel Hill, dining around, hitting up a couple of those regional Chinese restaurants, I think is something that you could make a night out of. There's a restaurant called Apteca, which I think really represents where Pittsburgh food is today. It's a vegan restaurant, but it's so incredible the way they have connected with farmers and made something that's very like kind of roots Western Pennsylvania meets Polish, Eastern European cuisine in a restaurant that's 100% vegan menu that also has a really incredible bar program and just a great vibe. And it's a place that it's been around, and every year they just seem to get better and better and better and better and more invested in what they do. So I feel like that's a very special place to go visit. If you're closer to downtown, you could pop over to Bar Marco in the Strip District, which is a small restaurant. It's Italian influenced, but like pulls again from Western Pennsylvania farms. 40 North, which is on the north side, which is another neighborhood that's really becoming very vibrant. It's connected to a place called the City of Asylum, which takes in at-risk writers from around the world and gives them a place to have residency and, work on their craft. But they also have a restaurant in this space that is working with Pennsylvania lamb growers. Western Pennsylvania is a really incredible place to grow lamb. And so a lot of restaurants highlight that. And this is a place that does that the best. And again, pulls from some of the Eastern European foodways. So those are some of the places that I would definitely recommend.
And then if you're that's the vegan place sounds especially interesting. What was that called again?
The vegan place is called Apteca, and it's pretty incredible that we talked earlier about like what Pittsburgh food is known for and what the stereotypes are. And I think it sort of turns that stereotype really on its head because it's still serving a lot of the foods. They're making pierogies, and their pierogies are amazing. But
yeah, this is the first time you said pierogies. This is the first time you said pierogies, and that's something again that comes up in sort of your, when you're doing your Pittsburgh 101 food research. It's like eat pierogies. So the good vegan take.
Yeah, a great vegan take and a great pierogi in general. Pierogies are an important part of Pittsburgh food culture. There's a place called Butter Joint, which is also in a neighborhood called Oakland, which is another great dining neighborhood. I actually just finished a dining guide to Oakland that came out yesterday. And that's where the universities, the two biggest universities, University of Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon University are. So that neighborhood is ripe with restaurants as well. There's a ton of places. And there's also one of the places that I'm finding very interesting now is a restaurant called the Golden Palace, which is in Oakland, which is a 30-year-old restaurant that for most of its history was just really known for kind of an all-you-can-eat catch-all Chinese American buffet. And they have just decided to get really deep into their Cantonese roots as well. So Cantonese food is kind of having a little bit of a moment in Pittsburgh right now. And then if you feel like an adventure, if you've got a car, if you feel like getting out of Pittsburgh, if you want to go see some of the parks, one of the things that I love about Pittsburgh is that you drive 15, 20 minutes out of the city and you're in this like incredibly beautiful woodland or rural or rolling hills countryside. There's a place called Ladybird's Luncheonette. It's about 40 minutes or so from downtown Pittsburgh. So this is just if you just happen to be out that way or going on an adventure in a town called Beaver, and they are doing things that are just incredibly special there. Like I'm jealous that this town has this place, because it's a little bit far of a drive to get there.
Yeah, so that's a good note, because if folks drive to Pittsburgh or rent a car, it seems like it does open up more options for things that you can see and places you can eat.
Yeah, and it's a city that has decent public transportation, so you can get around if you don't have a car. We've got a great bike share program that just introduced e-bikes this year, so that makes biking and tackling the hills a little bit easier. But having a car is helpful, especially if you want to go explore and get around, because there's just a lot to see outside of Pittsburgh as well.
And I have one last question for you. Have espresso martinis become such a big deal in Pittsburgh as they are in New York right now?
They're definitely creeping in. You're starting to see them on bar menus around town. I'd say about 3 or 4 months ago, you started to see espresso martinis everywhere. And they're there. Pittsburgh is also a great cocktail town. It's a place that since, I would say, 2012, I guess it was kind of when everyone sort of had that cocktail revolution. Pittsburgh's really held on to that. And there are a lot of the restaurants I mentioned also have really terrific cocktail programs. And a lot of the bars we have around town have terrific cocktail programs. And they have definitely made their own spin on the espresso martini for sure.
Well, I am a big fan of the espresso martini and happy to see it returning to menus everywhere. Hal, thank you.
And I should also add that Pittsburgh has a ton of breweries, more so than I think most other cities, especially of its size. Pittsburgh is a city of neighborhoods, and just about every neighborhood has 1 or 2 breweries now. And Pittsburgh was kind of late to the food truck craze of the 2010s, 2010s and stuff. But now you're starting to see, in conjunction with the breweries, a lot of really interesting, excellent food trucks as well.
I'm looking forward to more brewery trucks myself.
Yes, he does.
Well, look, Hal, thank you so much for joining us this morning. These conversations always get me excited for lunch, so maybe I'll get some Brooklyn perogies. But we're going to link to your Twitter in the show notes. We're also going to link to the food section of the Post-Gazette, where folks can see all your writing. And really appreciate you coming by.
Yeah, what a pleasure.
Well, I think it's now time for the last stop.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the last stop on this train. Everyone, please leave the train.
What an interview, Ryan.
Thank you. Yeah, there are so many restaurants now that I want to try that I have to go back to Pittsburgh. And since there's more museums, I could see a Pittsburgh episode 2, in the future here.
Absolutely. And Ed, I hope that I can maybe come back with you, get one of those Reubens.
Yeah, one of those Reubens with the French fries. That's what makes it Brandi Brothers special. So
that's why I liked Hal's opinions here, but I felt like he kind of wrote that off. That's what really made me sit up.
I don't think he knows how much you and I love sandwiches.
I know. I was formerly a sandwich influencer.
I don't even think formerly. I think you still in my heart, you're still a sandwich influencer.
Well, I appreciate that, Ryan. Well, thank you to Hal. And of course, we are here now in The Last Stop. This is the final segment of the show, the last segment of the show. That's why it's called The Last Stop. It's my favorite segment. It's your favorite segment. It's popularly known as the people segment. And that's because we invite people to come kind of behind the curtain here. Come on in with me and Ryan. Oftentimes it seems like we're broadcasting out to you, but The Last Stop is a place that we have communion together. We share and we philosophize and we mull over important moments in our lives. I say moments, but that's not all it could be. It's a moment in which we share of ourselves. It could be a story, could be a piece of gear, could be an anecdote, could be a dream, anything, as long as it inspires the spirit of wanderlust within us, even during the workaday week. So Ryan, with that succinct description of what a last stop is, I have to ask you, as I ask you every episode, do you have a last stop this week?
I do have a last stop. This last stop is brought to us by a tweet from Lawrence Wright, who I'm a big fan of. He wrote some really interesting books on believe it or not, 9/11, the history of 9/11, and Scientology and all sorts of stuff. He's a New Yorker columnist. He's a great writer. And he posted a picture of Plymouth Rock, and he said, quote, "Plymouth Rock has to be one of the most unremarkable artifacts of American history."
That's Massachusetts fighting words.
I know. So I assume you've been to Plymouth Rock.
I have been to Plymouth Rock. Listen, this is, is this the rock that the Pilgrims actually stepped off the boat onto? Highly debatable. I mean, it's a rock.
It's a rock. It's so unremarkable. It would be weird if they lied and said it was that rock. I don't think they would have picked a better rock.
No, I don't think that. I think that people wanted something to come visit, and so they threw a fence up around a local rock, and they said, "This is Plymouth Rock."
Yeah, somebody in the comments says it looks like a hippo in a mud bath, which I think would be cooler than this rock. And someone says that someone's pet rock got too big for them, and they had to release it into the wild.
It's if I'm not mistaken, it's been vandalized a few times, and doesn't it have the date 1620 carved into it?
I can't really tell from the photo. I mean, from the photo, it looks like a rock that's like in a cage.
Yeah,
it's
in a cage. No, yes, it is. It's like a zoo exhibit. I remember. Yeah. It's an enclosure. It's a rock enclosure.
It's on the beach, and so the tide comes in through that gate there, sort of. I mean, I guess it does. Just very strange. The people standing around it. They actually have to say they don't look that excited about it.
I mean, if you're going to Plymouth, you got to stop at Plymouth Rock, but really Plymouth Plantation, which is sort of one of these recreations of what the Pilgrim life was like. That's a more enjoyable, fuller experience. Actually, it's an immersive experience, which I know is right up your alley, Ryan.
I love immersive experiences, but I also love rocks that have been contained in cages.
You've not been to Plymouth Rock, I assume.
No, but after this, I have to go.
Not rushing there, yeah.
Yeah. It looks up there with the Paul Revere home, one of the great treasures. Well, thank you, Lawrence Wright, for sharing your thoughts on Plymouth Rock. Do you have a last stop this week, Kieran?
I do have a last stop, Ryan. In fact, I had a different last stop, but I just swapped this new one in because I was checking the old inbox, and I'm very excited to share with you a new immersive experience.
An immersive experience?
It's an immersive experience. I've been invited to attend it here in Boston. I guess probably because of my, being a travel influencer and all. And it's you and I have talked about this. There's these new type of exhibits that have been sprouting up where it's like they project, giant walls with like Picasso images and Frida Kahlo images, and it's like immersive Kahlo, and you're just surrounded by like organs and monkeys.
Yeah, I remember. We've talked a lot about that.
Yeah, and I haven't been to one of these. Have you?
No, I haven't.
I'm not really sure why I need to be surrounded by Starry Night, but I think this one I might have to take him up on. It's called, and I think even just the name alone is going to hook you, Ryan, Immersive Vatican.
Immersive Vatican.
The Immersive Vatican. Wow. I'm going to read to you from immersivevatican.com, and amazing that URL is still available. immersivevatican.com. For the first time, experience the art world's best kept secrets. I guess it says for the first time, but really for the first time would be just go to the Vatican. The Baroque works at St. Peter's Basilica and Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel frescoes and more. Immersive Vatican brings iconic and rarely seen masterpieces to life. Go beyond the art. I'm trying to say it with all the exclamation points that they have here. From the ancient Roman catacombs below to the colonnade above, Immersive Vatican traces the pathways and architecture of the famous buildings and churches of the Vatican within Rome, the eternal city. It's, again, I argue with for the first time ever, but, pretty good, Ryan.
Yeah, that is pretty good. You know what is really funny is I just read an article today about, did you see the movie The Two Popes with Anthony Hopkins?
Yeah.
So Anthony Hopkins, Jonathan Pryce playing the two popes. There was a scene where they're in the Sistine Chapel, and Netflix couldn't get permission to film this film in the Sistine Chapel for reasons that are beyond me. Two popes said no. And so they spent $5 million to recreate a Sistine Chapel so they could film the scene, and then they just destroyed it. And apparently it was quite extraordinary. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that they had filmed it in the actual. I remember the scenes taking place there. Quite a lot of the movie takes place there.
Yeah, that was a basically a life-size Sistine Chapel that was built and then destroyed.
That's a shame. The Immersive Vatican could have bought that.
Immersive Vatican could have bought that. They wouldn't have needed any projections. You could have been like a touring little Vatican.
Oh, I have to say, it's basically showing some of these frescoes, but they're blown up to superhuman size and projected onto the walls here. This may be something that I've got to go and report back on. I hope that you can wait until I get back, because that would be something you and I would really enjoy together. That's true. I could see if I can get you a comp ticket alongside with me, Ryan. And if so, we will definitely bring it back here on the pod.
Yeah. And I would wear, like, I could dress as a priest, or I could do whatever to make it more immersive,
Yeah, that'd be great. You could be the creepy older priest, and I could dress as the altar boy. You've been asking me to do it for years, Ryan. This might just be the opportunity.
Well, there's not going to be a better one. Well, I look forward to hearing about the Immersive Vatican, which apparently is in collaboration with the Vatican.
Oh, yes, I forgot to say that. That's right. I'm sure that the Vatican comes off very well in this, because the actual Vatican collaborated in the production. Yeah,
no, that's fantastic. Well, I look forward to hearing about it if I don't get a chance to see it with you. So, Kieran, what are we talking about next week?
Well, Ryan, we've got 2 episodes. One, the next episode in the feed is going to be one of our famous return trips, where we pull up from the archives, we dredge up from the archives one of our favorite episodes, and this one's going to be one of our most popular. It's My Country Guide to Bhutan. Bhutan.
Oh gosh, that episode must be from like 2019. That's exciting.
It's from a while ago, but Bhutan does not change a ton. And it was super interesting to track Bhutan throughout the pandemic years, because they were essentially able to kind of close their borders. They're this remote Himalayan kingdom, and I was able to visit pre-pandemic, and it's one of the most extraordinary trips of my life. So we'll be talking about Bhutan, but then following that, a very special episode about an interest that I don't talk about on the pod a lot, because you tend to make fun of me, which is I love Star Wars.
I'm sorry, what?
I love Star Wars.
Wow.
And I subscribe to Patreon. I'm a Patreon supporter of a great show called Rebel Force Radio, which is the largest Star Wars podcast. And Jimmy Mack, one of the hosts, is going to come on. We're going to talk about Star Wars theme parks. This is related to the Galaxy's Edge, which is at the Disney parks. This is like the immersive Star Wars world that they've built. And they've just launched a 2-day experience that's it's almost like Sleep No More, but for
a 2-day immersive Star Wars experience.
That's exactly right. And you dress up and you play the characters, and Kylo Ren comes and Rey comes, and it's very exciting. So he hasn't gone on the Galactic Cruiser bit, but he's one of the most, he has studied these things and thought about them endlessly. So we're going to talk about the traveling for Star Wars and what we wish could be built, what we want Disney to do with this Star Wars brand that they now own.
Well, I have no doubt that Disney will build more Star Wars. So that is exciting. I keep getting the ads for the hotel that's there. It's like stay in space. And it's like,
that's the Galactic Star Cruiser.
Oh, gotcha.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, for whatever reason, Disney thinks that is high on my travel list, because they keep showing it to me on Instagram.
Insta thinks that I need maternity clothes. I get a lot of maternity clothes.
Maybe there's some you don't know. Well, until then, I'm Ryan Davis.
And I'm Kieran Schmidt.
And this is Out of Office, a travel podcast. Maybe I could dress like the Pope when I went to the Star Wars.
I was doing Darth Vader. You stepped on my Darth Vader.